Get another car down here. Tell him to get it down here.
2 million Americans killed on our streets and highways. This awesome figure was reached back in 1974. Perhaps it was on a night like this.
A lot of help here. Hold on.
If war is hell, then our highways are even worse, because 2 million deaths are far more than all the battle deaths we sustained in all the wars our nation has ever fought. This is not a fact to be proud of. Our history of highway slaughter is undoubtedly one of our country's greatest tragedies.
Help me, God, forgive me. Oh, forgive me. Oh, forgive me, God. Help me, help me, help me. And forgive me. Oh, I can't get my hair. Oh, God.
Of all the Americans from every corner of the nation who have fallen victim to a highway tragedy, it is reasonable to assume that each and every one of them had only one thing in common with all the others. Not one of them thought it could happen to them. Is that what you think, too? When the first driver's license was issued shortly after the turn of the century, safe driving was a relatively simple matter. You could drive all day and see very few other cars on the road. Dogs and chuckholes were the major safety hazards. Roads were very poor, and if you moved along at more than 20 miles an hour, you were taking your life in your hands, even though serious auto accidents were few and far between. In sharp contrast with today's traffic laws, the first speed limit established was 15 miles per hour in the country, but one had to slow down to 12 miles per hour in the city. But wheeled life has become more and more complex as the vehicle population has exploded to the point where there are now nearly 150 million licensed drivers. There is no doubt that the invention of the highway vehicle, as we know it, ranks as one of the greatest benefits to our modern civilization that the mind of man has ever devised. With the increase in vehicles and drivers has come an agonizing increase in the issuance of death certificates to victims of auto crashes. Men, women, children. Out of this tremendous gift of mobility has come death, pain, bloodshed, grief, and fantastic monetary waste. Tens of thousands of our citizens meet a needless death each year in traffic accidents. Hundreds of thousands are permanently disabled, mutilated, disfigured for life. For years, you, the driver, were singled out as the culprit responsible for the nation's horrendous highway fatality rate. You were careless, reckless, negligent, unresponsive to the dangers of auto travel. The finger of guilt eventually swung to the automakers. Sharp and protruding objects inside and outside of cars brought claims that death traps were rolling off the assembly lines. There were charges that manufacturers were sacrificing safety features for speed and beauty. Then our highway system was cast in the role of the villain. Charges were made concerning misleading traffic signs, roadside hazards, unprotected shoulder drop-offs, inadequate traffic control devices. They were contributing to our highway slaughter rather than protecting motorists. Improperly constructed and poorly maintained guardrails, capable of impaling cars and occupants like huge metal spears, brought cries of negligence from safety experts. Here you see the results of a miracle involving the old-type guardrail. This car, loaded with teenagers, slid into the end of a guardrail. The rail knifed through the car, pinning all of the young men in the rear portion of the car. Believe it or not, no one was seriously injured. With automotive and highway engineers making significant improvements in both vehicles and roadways, and with more than 15,000 persons killed each year in one-car accidents, the finger of guilt has again swung to you, the driver. Most of you lowered your speeds during the initial phase of the much-publicized energy crunch, and it paid off by saving lives throughout the country. But it was only a temporary measure, as drivers forgot about saving gasoline with reduced speed and attempted to save time by increasing driving speeds. It is imperative that you upgrade your safety standards. It's a life or death situation. If you're going to drive, then it's essential that you drive and survive. Highway survival begins with driving a safe vehicle. It should be obvious that it takes more than driving skill alone to assure you're not becoming another highway fatality. A top-rate driver in a third-rate clunker can spell tragedy. Your car must perform as it was designed to, especially in an emergency situation. No matter how well automobiles are built, certain parts wear out, need adjustment, or must be replaced periodically. Many motorists don't keep their cars in safe working order, either through ignorance or because they are just naturally careless about the proper maintenance. Remember, this maintenance is your responsibility, even though many states, as in Ohio, perform a service for the motoring public by holding vehicle inspections and thus save lives by pointing out defects that could later cause severe accidents. The first rule of highway survival is to keep your car in good working order. Remember the 5 areas which need almost constant attention for maximum safety: tires, lights, brakes, exhaust system, and steering. Faulty steering can sometimes lead to something like this. The victim of this tragedy was in his early 30s. He had a wife and 2 small children. He was buying a home, and every penny counted. Perhaps that's why he postponed having the repairs done on his car. He had traveled the route from his job to his home hundreds of times. This particular evening, as he prepared to exit the freeway, his steering failed. He slammed directly into the concrete abutment. He was dead before the splinters of glass stopped bouncing on the roadway. The first rule of highway survival: maintain your vehicle as though it were part of your body. And maintain your body as though your very life depends upon its flawless operation. This is the second rule of highway survival. Like cars, the human body requires adjustments. This is particularly true of our senses of hearing and seeing. The loss of these important faculties is sometimes so gradual that a person is unaware of deterioration. Dim-seeing eyes are slow-seeing eyes, and since 90% of your behind-the-wheel reactions are based upon your sense of sight, you'll be needlessly handicapping yourself if you don't maintain the best vision possible. As you grow older, you need a greater amount of light to see the same things you did at an earlier age. For good night vision, a 33-year-old needs twice as much light as the 20-year-old required. Here's an instance in which night vision was cut to near zero by bad weather. This type of chain reaction accident can happen in a dust storm, rainstorm, snowstorm, in an area of dense smoke or smog. A deadly combination of rain and fog set up this tragedy, all because a driver with limited vision came to a dead stop in the driving lane of this highway. There were 25 vehicles involved in this collision. 2 people were killed and several others were seriously injured, and thousands of dollars in damage has been done to the vehicles. When faced with a sudden near-zero visibility highway situation, many drivers panic and hit the brakes. Others, intent upon gaining better visibility, lean forward in their seats and unintentionally increase their speed. Reduce your speed gradually and steer carefully off the traveled portion of the highway or take an exit ramp. If no exit ramp is handy, move your car as close as possible to the guardrail and stop. But the best precaution of all is to have your eyes examined and your vision corrected if it's necessary. There are many ways to kill yourself when behind the wheel of your automobile. No one needs help. But recently, drug usage has increased the highway death toll. Drugs ranging from true narcotics to those used for nervousness, weight control, high blood pressure, even hay fever and cold remedies can set you up for an accident. Drugs that produce no unusual symptoms in most people may cause abnormal reactions in some individuals, making it unsafe for them to drive. Don't drive when taking drugs unless you are certain they will not impair your driving ability. Blood containing another kind of drug, alcohol, continues to add color to every highway in our nation. Alcohol is by far the American motorist's most favorite drug. It's also our #1 killer on the highway. It's estimated that more than 50% of all fatal accidents are alcohol-related. It takes very little alcohol in your blood to turn you into a potential highway assassin. Even one drink can impair some facet of your driving behavior. Remember, drinking drivers get carried away. It's not the purpose of this film to convince you not to drink. 8 out of 10 Americans drink, and most of them pick the right time and place, and they stay alive. But when you drink and then drive, you are flirting with tragedy. This young man was at a party earlier in the evening. He had 3 years of college behind him, and he was near the top of his class. He had everything to live for. He was less than a mile from the party when he lost control of his car. Witnesses said the car had been weaving before he crashed. A human life full of promise came to a sudden end. Within a few minutes after consuming alcohol, your driving capabilities are affected. And with a blood alcohol level of 0.15, your chances of having an accident are 25 times greater than if your system were free of alcohol. One of the most alarming changes in motoring habits is that teenagers are drinking more, driving more, and more of them are dying in alcohol-related accidents. One who is inexperienced in driving and inexperienced in drinking is literally a motorized time bomb when behind the wheel of an automobile. In a recent study, a group of expert drivers drank 4 bottles of beer, then took to the track. Their driving performance was cut by 20 to 30%. For an inexperienced drinker-driver, this figure can reach 50 or 60%. And when it does, watch out. To make the situation even worse, most teenagers travel in groups, so when there is a serious accident, often 2 or more may lose their lives. Cruising and boozing isn't worth it. One safety expert says anyone who drinks heavily and then drives is socially sick. If so, this teenager is no longer sick. He's dead. Drive and survive rule number 3, don't drink and then drive. You see here one of the most unpleasant duties of a law enforcement officer. Each year, 8,000 parents are notified that they've lost a son or daughter in an alcohol-related traffic accident. Try to imagine that this is your home. Safety belts are nothing new. They were first installed in cars around the turn of the century to keep motorists from bouncing out of open vehicles. Most of us don't object to wearing hard hats, safety shoes, protective goggles, and gloves when we work. We buckle up on an airliner. and at play we think about our safety. Bright clothing when hunting, life preservers around water. But in your car, you throw caution to the wind. Most, but not all of you. Today, most professional race drivers wear safety belts on and off the track. These guys earn their living by driving and surviving. They know there's no profit in getting killed or injured. Professional drivers are smart enough to battle the track, not statistics. Buckling up can double, even triple your chances of survival if you are involved in an accident. That's Drive and Survive rule number 4. Always wear your safety belts. The driver was a young, attractive school teacher. When she left the freeway and entered the exit ramp, she lost control of her car. The vehicle spun around several times and finally flipped over. The driver was thrown out of the car and smashed against the road surface. She died instantly from head injuries. Had she been wearing her safety belts, she could have lived through the accident. What caused this intelligent woman to drive that night without buckling up? Did she forget? Was she in a hurry? Didn't she believe what she had heard about safety belts? It's too late for her. How about you? When the doors of a car fly open during an accident, something is bound to fly out. Usually it's the driver and passengers. Safety belts keep you inside the car, not under it. The victim was unfamiliar with the freeway. He evidently became confused and lost control. The car veered off the freeway, careened off a guardrail, and flipped over on its top. The young victim was catapulted into the air like a doll and came down more than 40 feet from his car. Almost every bone in his body was broken. Investigating officers believe he would be alive today if he had taken 3 words of advice. It's a good bet he heard them 100 times. Use safety belts. He didn't. See it dangling from the driver's seat? Safety belts not only keep you inside the car, they keep you in your seat. This victim was on his way to work. Maybe his thoughts were on his job. They certainly weren't on how to drive and survive. He hit a utility pole and was catapulted into the windshield. You don't have to be exceeding the speed limit to have an accident or to be saved by wearing safety belts. His speed was estimated at 30 miles per hour when he rammed the tree. Insignificant damage to the car, except the windshield, and that was enough to take this young man's life. Most auto collisions involve a kind of 1-2 punch. 1 is when your car hits or gets hit by something. 2 is when you are rocketed into the windshield or dashboard or some other section of the car interior. Safety belts greatly reduce or eliminate the number 2 punch, the one that usually kills or painfully injures you. This unbelted passenger received severe head injuries. Here's another passenger. She was riding with her best friend. Be a true friend and encourage your passengers to buckle up. For unbelted passengers involved in an accident, the chances of being killed are more than 4 times greater than for those wearing belts. For unbelted front seat passengers, the chance of being killed is more than 5 times as great. Passengers not wearing safety belts are twice as likely to sustain serious non-fatal injuries. Another windshield has claimed its victim. This is the tragic ending to an outing by 2 high school classmates. This young girl was thrown into the windshield with such force that she suffered massive head injuries. It was the number 2 punch that killed her. Frequently, a minor accident can be the cause of a much more serious accident when the driver is unbelted. This car was sideswiped by another vehicle quite some distance up the street. The impact tossed the driver across the seat to the right side of the car. The out-of-control car continued on down the street and finally smashed into this utility pole, killing the driver. Once an unbelted driver is knocked from his normal driving position, it's impossible to regain control of his vehicle. This is another of the many reasons for wearing seat belts, if you want to drive and survive. some auto accidents are not soon forgotten, for they may affect entire families for years to come.
Mr. Sheriff, could you tell us about Dwayne's accident?
Well, on October the 1st of 1961, we had been to a football game. He took my neighbor and I home and then went back to the dance and went for a bite of lunch up at the lunchroom. On his way home, he started raining, coming down a hill. There's a car pulled out in front of him, and he dodged to miss it and hit a telephone pole. Of course, if he'd had seatbelts on, he wouldn't have been hurt. But at that time, we didn't have any. So it threw him out on his head. Consequences was they picked him up for dead. But through a miracle, they found a little heartbeat, so they started working with him and saved his life. After about 9 months of unconsciousness, why, he started coming back around to us, and we've still got him.
Mrs. Sheriff, has this caused much of a change in the living habits in your family?
Well, it has changed our lives considerable, as we were quite active before as a family, and all together going on vacations and doing things together. And now, since Dwayne has to be fed and everything done for him, since he hasn't any balance or coordination, why, we always have to manage to somebody stay home with him or plan something that way. First, Dwayne is quite fortunate, since he has 3 sisters that helps out an awful lot. And with him having to be fed, taken care of completely, since he doesn't have balance or coordination, why, we never can leave him alone. So somebody's always with him. And then we have a lot of friends and relatives that helps out. So it does work out quite conveniently.
Thank you, Mrs. Sheriff. Dwayne, do you have a message for our viewers today?
Wear your seatbelt.